Welcome environmental systems students to the Dallas Independent School District STEM Environmental Education Center. We'd like to give a special welcome to the students at Molina High School. We wish you could be here today in person with us, but since you can't be, we're going to do our best to make you feel like you're here during a virtual field trip this afternoon. If you are watching this and have not registered for this afternoon's field trip yet, you can still do that by going to www.tiny.cc/EEC register. Once you get there, you can get yourself or your class registered for this field trip. We just use that information for our attendance purposes. And today's field trip is going to be all about managing natural resources. During this virtual field trip, students will explore methods of land use and management and describe its effects on land fertility. Students will also identify source, use, quality management, and conservation of water. So we're going to start off with an introduction of how to manage natural resources and why that's important with Ms. Nash. Next, we're going to look at methods of land use and management with Mrs. Fuller. Third, we're going to look at management and conservation of water with Mr. Ramirez. And last but not least, we're going to look at rain barrels right here at our center with Mr. Gorman. While we're doing all of that, you can ask us questions, and we encourage you to ask questions. Since this is a virtual field trip, the way you ask a question is by going to www.tiny.cc/EEC-question-answer. And once you get there, you'll fill out a very short form to ask us any questions you have related to managing resources. You can ask as many questions as you like, and we will do our best to answer all of them in the time that we have with you this afternoon. So with that, let me stop sharing my screen here and turn it over to Ms. Nash, who's going to get us started with that introduction to managing resources.
We're talking about resource management, how we take care of our resources, our natural resources. And one of the big insights of environmental studies is that everything is connected. And so that means that the biotic, the plants, animals, fungi, and all those little guys, the abiotic, the climate, the air, the soil, the water, the rocks, everything else, everything is connected. And how we think about that affects, if we make that leap, then we can manage our resources so that we'll have them in the future. So I took a little walk a couple of days ago, and just out the back door here, and I'm going to show you what I found. And we'll think about how these resources have been managed, or in some cases mismanaged. Okay, so here we go. So our facility used to be used for grazing cattle, and they were stock ponds. So they dug this big hole, they had a dam, and if it rained, it filled with water. And it used to be quite large. The dam has not been maintained, and so the water is all gone. Then we have drought that dried it up completely. So that means that all the fish and all the other animals, the turtles, everybody else is also gone. And the other animals need to drink the water. They don't have water either. So in Texas, one of our limiting factors is water. Okay? And we need to be really conscious of how we use it and how we keep it clean. So these trees used to be in the middle of the pond. Now they're kind of high and dry. So we used to have beaver out there, and we can see these branches that they chewed on, and they're not there anymore either. And interestingly, these are branches that a couple of years ago, the water got high, rained. And you can see where the water was that high, they had to chew off the tops of those trees to get up there. Here's a fisherman, so people can't use that resource either for recreation or to get food to eat. Here's the last carp, okay? So they were the kind of last survivors, and I found one more skeleton down there in the bottom. Some deer came through looking for water, but no cigar. We do have another little pond that we still have water in. So this one, we've been artificially adding water. And that's good because the deer and other animals come there. Little birdies are on the edge. There were some killdeer and some sandpipers today. I was down there. I don't know. I think it dried up totally this summer, so I don't know if there are any fish left, but maybe. Lots of tracts of everybody coming to drink there. So this is their only source of water left. And here's the pipe that's bringing in water to that pond. So we're pumping that water with our windmill, okay, from underground. Now, groundwater, of course, is another resource that people have used for a long time. And again, we have to be careful we don't pollute it and we don't overuse it. In some parts of Texas, they're pumping out the aquifers at a really alarming rate. And pretty soon they won't have any water for irrigation. So again, it's important to think about how much you're using and is it being recharged? And here's something I think, so everyone comes out and they see these big things on the ground and think, what is that? Those are called bodark balls or horse apples. And they're the fruit of a tree. Here's the mother tree, and this is the female. So they're kind of like cedar trees. They have male and female. The females have these big fruits. And the day I went out there, a squirrel was out there kind of gnawing on a few of them. But squirrels are not really an adequate vector for seed dispersal. So the question is, why does this tree produce these gigantic fruits? Nobody eats them. They call them horse apples, but really I've never seen a horse actually eat one. So here's an example of poor resource management by our ancient ancestors. So scientists think that these fruits were eaten by the giant ground sloths, because plants make fruit to partner with animals, because again, plants can't walk around, so they need help from animals sometimes to disperse seeds. They think that the giant ground sloth was the partner, and there's a picture of a person with one to give you a measure of size. So when in the Pleistocene, these animals, along with a lot of the other megafauna, went extinct. And we think it was because of human intervention, that was when human beings arrived on the North American continent. And at that time, all these giant animals got eaten. And here's one that's still here. So the mockingbird likes to eat the red berries of this plant. And to make those berries, this plant has to be pollinated. And there's only one animal that pollinates this plant. So hummingbirds are what we call the obligate pollinator, meaning they're the only ones that will pollinate that plant. So again, there's that intimate connection, and we need to remember about those connections. Because if the hummingbird disappeared, then the turkey cap wouldn't make any seeds, and then the mockingbird wouldn't have food to eat. So we need to be really aware of all the connections between all the living things and the water and other resources around us. Okay. Now, I'm going to show you a couple little friends here that I brought today, because at the pond, when the fish died, these little guys had to leave too because they had no more water. So we hope that they wandered off and found more water, but it might have been a pretty long walk. So our little turtles here, our crawdads, our fish, our water snakes, other animals that also depend on the pond, and the animals that come to drink there. And also people who want to have water for their cattle, or their sheep, or their goats, or for their own garden. Here's everybody's friend, everyone's favorite, the snake. Okay, reminding us that everyone is connected and that we need to take care of everything so that we can all survive on our wonderful planet. So if you have any questions, you can ask Mr. Broughton. And Red says goodbye.
Thank you, Ms. Nash. The question that came up is, what do the animals do when those ponds dry up? And they will have to go find another pond or some water source to drink water, because all living things need water to live. And if there's no water where you're at, you're going to have to move somewhere where there is water. So there are other water sources somewhat near us. We have a small lake in our Post Oak Preserve that's across the street from our center. They might go there. And we have a neighbor that has some greenhouses, and they have a small pond, so maybe the animals moved over there. But they've got to move somewhere where there's water, or they will not survive. All right, now we're going to look at methods of land use and management and its effect on land fertility with Mrs. Fuller.
Hello, boys and girls. I'm going to be talking to you about land management. It's very, very important. Let's talk first about intensive agriculture. And we're real used to intensive agriculture because we've been using that since the 1950s. And the first one we're going to talk about is monoculture. And that's where the farmer only plants one type of plant, like sorghum or cotton or corn, and that's all that's planted there. And it has a tendency to rob the soil of its nutrients because it gets planted with the same type of plant over and over and over again. So you learned when you were learning about the environment that biodiversity is good and monoculture is not. The second thing we're going to talk about are CAFOs, and that's concentrated animal feedlot operations. They're very big here in the United States. Texas has a lot of feedlots. And it's one way that the agricultural industry has of fattening up, whether it's pork or turkeys or chickens or cattle or whatever. They put them in great big barns or feedlots and feed them to fatten them up. But you've got several drawbacks here, one of which is it's not particularly good for the animal. They're really highly crowded. And the other thing is there's a lot of pollution from the waste products from these animals, from their urine and from their droppings. And some of these pools, when you look at these lagoons where they hold these waste products, will be bright pink, and it's from the bacteria that feed on this. And you usually can tell when you're close to one of these feedlots, because a long way away actually, because they smell terrible. So that's not particularly good for the animals, and it's not particularly good for us, and it's not particularly good for the environment, either one. Now, the next type of intensified or intensive agriculture we're going to talk about is the third wave of agriculture. It's called the Green Revolution. And it started in the 1940s in Mexico with a man named Norman Borlaug. And they were already working on this in Mexico. And he was real interested as a scientist, and he went down there and studied it. And a couple of foundations like the Rockefeller Foundation and the Ford Foundation here in the United States subsidized his work. And it has several different components. It's not just one thing. But at the time, several countries around the world were experiencing famine. And so this idea of the Green Revolution, it involves choosing seeds, choosing plants that have a high yield. But these high yield plants require a lot of pesticide, a lot of herbicide, a lot of water, and a lot of mechanization. But the United States, in the 1940s, we had to import to our country about half of the wheat that we used. By the 1950s, we didn't have to import it anymore. And by the 1960s, we were actually exporting wheat. So as far as wheat production is concerned, it was a big boon to the United States. India was having a terrible famine. They were about to lose millions of people. And so Borlaug went over there and consulted with them, and they decided on using a particular rice grain. It's called, let's see, I've got it written down, IR8. And it's a high yield rice, but lots of pesticide, lots of water, lots of herbicide. But it saved the people there in India. And India used to grow about 30,000 different varieties of rice. Now they just grow one. Oh, well, I take that back. I think there's 10 different varieties that they have, but they primarily use this IR8. Same thing in China, and it saved a lot of people from starving to death. So Mr. Borlaug was credited with saving about 1 billion people's lives from starvation, through using this green revolution. But it's got a lot of drawbacks. It's not labor intensive, so people who used to make their living on the farm don't do that anymore. It's damaging for the soil because of the herbicides and the pesticides and all that. And of course, it requires a tremendous amount of water. Water is going to be the issue in Texas in the 21st century. So I think that's all I'm going to say about the Green Revolution. So what do we have now? Well, if you kept your ear to the rail as far as planting and that sort of thing is concerned, you hear more about biodiversity, wanting more different kinds of species of plants and that sort of thing. It makes for a healthier environment. We now have polyculture. Poly means many, mono means one. So instead of just planting one type of plant, we now plant many, and that's better for the soil. We've got pasture-raised livestock now as opposed to the concentrated animal feedlot operations. And people are very quick to advertise that we've got grain-fed beef, we've got pasture-fed beef, pasture-raised chickens. We've got free-range chickens right here at the Environmental Center. So it's healthier for the animals and subsequently healthier for the soil and healthier for us and healthier for the water, the groundwater. Organic farming, I know you can't go to the grocery store without seeing things that are organically raised, and that means they're raised without pesticides and herbicides. And now we're going to composting and hugelkultures and all sorts of things to take the waste from the kitchen, the waste from the yards, and turn it back into the soil. And very briefly, I'm going to talk about one more thing about land management, and that's mining. We do have mining here in Texas. We've got aggregate mining, we've got coal mining, we've got uranium mining, and there's a lot of state regulations on that require the companies that do the mining to return the land to a better state than it was when they started. And my time's all up. If you have any questions about land management, Mr. Broughton will be glad to answer them. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Fuller. The question that came up was, why don't we do all pasture-raised beef or pasture-raised chicken or all organic farming if that's what's better? And one of the main reasons that we don't do that is because it's also more expensive. And when you go to the grocery store, you don't want to spend all of your paycheck on groceries. If you go to a restaurant, you'd want it to be, $10 instead of $12. So a lot of it comes down to money, but we're still trying to develop better ways and more cost-effective ways to grow our food healthier so that we can manage the land, because without the land, we'd be in big trouble. All right, now we're going to look at water conservation with Mr. Ramirez.
Hello, my name is Ms. Ramirez, and in this segment, we're going to be looking at water uses, water sources, and water management. So we're going to do a quick demonstration to learn about the percentages of water around our world. So as you see behind me, I have a globe, and again, about 71% of Earth's surface is covered in water. So in our little demonstration here, I have a 1,000 milliliter graduated cylinder. This is going to represent all of the water that's on planet Earth. So my question for you guys is, of this 1,000 milliliters, how much do you think is going to be fresh water, and how much do you think is going to be salt water? So go ahead and make a quick prediction for how many milliliters of this 1,000 do you think is going to be fresh, and then how many milliliters do you think will be salt water? And then while you guys are making your guesses, I'm going to go ahead and pull out my other demonstration. So for salt water, you can see that of that 1,000 milliliters, about 972 milliliters represents the amount of salt water. So most of the water on planet Earth is going to be salt water. On the other hand, for fresh water, only 28 milliliters of that entire 1,000 milliliters is only fresh water. So given that information, Do you think we have a lot of water readily available for us to use? So my next question is, of this 28 milliliters of fresh water, how much do you think is in ice caps? How much do you think is going to be groundwater? How much do you think is going to be surface water? And how much do you think is going to be water that's in the atmosphere or soil? So remember, we're only pulling out of this 28 milliliters of fresh water. So let me go ahead and show you our next demonstration so that we can see those amounts. And for our next demonstration, so the amount of water that you see here is representative of fresh water. So this container here has 23 milliliters, and this is going to represent the amount of fresh water that is available in ice caps and glaciers. Then we have this little graduated cylinder that only has 4 milliliters, and this is going to represent the amount of fresh water that is in groundwater. Then I'm going to take my little eyedropper here, and I'm going to put 2 drops inside our little petri dish. And these 2 little drops represent the amount of surface water. So that's not a lot. And then in my next petri dish, I'm going to put 1 drop of water, and that's going to represent the amount of water that is in the atmosphere and also within our soil. So given this demonstration and the amounts, do you think it's important for us to conserve and take care of the water sources that we have? So that's my thinking question for you guys. So what we're going to do next, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with you guys, and we're going to look at a quick little PowerPoint to better understand water sources and usage in the U.S. So let me go ahead and start that screen share and present the PowerPoint. So the first slide is just a review of what I already showed you with our demonstration. So you can see that most of the water is salt water, about 97%, and then about only 3% is fresh water. So only a very tiny amount of water that we actually have here on Earth is readily available for us to use. And then in our next slide, where do you think Dallas water comes from? So go ahead and make some quick guesses about where do you think Dallas gets its water from? And I was actually quite surprised when I was doing this research. So the city of Dallas gets its water from a variety of different lakes. They include Lake Ray Roberts, Lake Ray Hubbard, Louisville Lake, Grapevine Lake. I was surprised at Lake Tawakoni. So they do get Dallas water from a variety of different lakes. And something that I was able to identify with is I live near Cedar Creek Reservoir. And when I first moved there back in about 2014, they started putting pipelines. And I was so confused. I had no idea what these big pipes were. And you can see these pipelines on the right-hand corner. So what ended up happening is the Tarrant County Water District partnered with Dallas Water Utilities, and they are in this big plan to link Cedar Creek Reservoir to Richland Chambers Reservoir, which is in Corsicana, and ultimately link it up to these other Dallas waterways and eventually all the way up to Fort Worth. So their plan is to link all of these water sources to provide additional water to Dallas, and it's estimated to deliver, and this is a huge number, 350 million gallons of water per day to North Texas. So I know when they started doing, putting up those pipelines from Cedar Creek, I know a lot of people that I live around were kind of upset because they thought that would take away water from our lake, and our lake is mostly a recreational lake. So that's just some of the places where we get our water from. So I was really surprised at how far reaching the water comes from. And then the next thing we're going to talk about is our personal water usage. So we have our direct water usage. So think about if you take a shower or wash your car. And then we have what's called virtual water use. So virtual water use is the indirect use of water. So it's essentially water that is used in making the food you eat, the things you buy, and the energy that you use. So an example of virtual water use would be, for example, if you make a turkey sandwich. The ingredients that you put inside that turkey sandwich at some point involve water usage. So a couple of thinking questions. How many gallons of water do you think it takes to grow just 1 leaf of lettuce? So go ahead and make your guess for that. And then also think about how many gallons of water does it take to grow and produce ingredients just to make 2 slices of bread for your sandwich. And then think about how many gallons of water do you think it takes to produce about 1/5 a pound of turkey. So that's about the amount that you would put inside a turkey sandwich. And I'm going to show you the statistics, and it is quite astounding. So it takes about 2 gallons of water to grow that leaf of lettuce. And then for 2 slices of bread, it takes about 24 gallons of water. So think about the water that's needed to help the wheat or the grains grow. Think about the water that's used in the factoring process, in the manufacturing process. And then for the turkey, it takes 104 gallons of water to produce that 1/5 pound of turkey. So think about all the water that's needed to help grow the food for the turkeys. Think about all the water that's needed to feed and water the turkeys. And then think about the water that's necessary for the manufacturing part of that turkey meat. So we actually use quite a lot of water. And then something cool that you guys can do, you can go to watercalculator.org, and it will calculate both your direct and your indirect water usage. So I took the little quiz on the watercalculator.org, and it said that I use about 220 gallons of water daily for my indoor use. So I know my biggest fault is my long showers. I enjoy long, hot showers in the evenings, and I know that takes up a lot of water. And then I do a lot of laundry because I have 2 large dogs that love to sleep with me, and they just have hair and dirt all over my room. So I do laundry a lot. So I know I use a lot of water for those things. But also think of my shopping. So for my virtual use, I used quite a lot of water for my virtual use. So shopping contributed to my water usage, my diet, the food that I'm eating, and also all the pet food that I'm buying for all my animals. So my question for you guys is, how is water used indirectly in shopping and diet, in the foods that we eat and the foods that we feed our animals? So water is involved in all of those processes. And then our next thing is water usage by sector. So if we take a look at this graph here, and if you take a look at the color keys, you can see that in the US, most of our water usage is used by for power, for thermoelectric power, and that's about 45%. And then the next largest segment would be for irrigation for farming and crops. So compare the US water usage by sector. How do you think water usage by sector in the US compares to other countries? So do you think other countries use as much water for thermoelectric power, or do you think they use more water for other areas? And then the other infographic that you see on the right is personal water usage. So you can see the average person in the US uses about 156 gallons a day. Now compare that to someone who lives in Mali, for example. They're only using about 3 gallons a day. So why do you think individuals in the US use more water compared to other countries? So I thought that was very interesting, and it made me look back and reflect upon my own water uses. And our next thing we're going to talk about really quick is water quality. So with water quality, we have what's called point source contamination, and that is just pollution that can be traced back to a source. So think about water pollution from treatment plants or sewers. And then we also have what's called non-point contamination, and that's just when an area is polluted, but we can't trace it back to a certain source. So examples of non-point solution could be things like air pollution, because it's spread out over a long area and we can't really pinpoint the exact place that it started from. But other examples of pollution, we could get seepage from houses, runoff from farms and residential areas. So I know a lot of people, if you change your own oil and you don't dispose of that oil properly, when it rains, it can run off into the waterways. Wastewater from manufacturing plants. Around here, there's a lot of farmland, so there's the fertilizer runoff, and an increase in fertilizer runoff from the farms increases the amount of algae growth and blooms. And then also think about water sources of pollution in your community. So if you live around White Rock Lake or other water sources like ponds and lakes, how has pollution affected those areas? And then something that I like talking about are water-borne illnesses. I know a lot of people don't think about these illnesses in the US. People tend to think about them only in the third world countries, but the US actually has quite a few water-borne illnesses. And I am a huge fan of Monsters Inside Me on Animal Planet, and they always talk about all these cool little microscopic parasites and things. So one of the more well-known parasites that we have here in the U.S., and that was evident here in Texas during the summer, is Naegleria fowleri, and it's known as the brain-eating amoeba. And it's just a single-celled amoeba, and it causes brain swelling. Now, it is rare, but it almost always results in death. And in fact, there was a case of an Austin child this past summer that actually passed away from it. So within the last 10 years, there have been 34 infections of that brain-eating amoeba. And then Giardia and Cryptosporidium, also known as crypto, those are actually very common here in the US as well. And those are spread through contaminated feces. So as I was looking for information on these two, the CDC puts out a lot of infographics during the summertime to warn people about safe pool activities. And so I just cracked up laughing when I saw this one about don't leave your mark at the pool this summer. So Giardia and Cryptosporidium have their main symptoms are stomach aches and really bad diarrhea, and it's super easy to spread in pools and water parks. So usually during the summertime, it's going to be those two that we hear on the news as outbreaks in the US. So something interesting I learned was that in 2008, Texas had the most cases of Cryptosporidium, and they had over 3,000 cases reported in the state of Texas, and it was mostly due to spreading in water parks. So now I'm kind of grossed out by all those water parks that they have. So those are some waterborne illnesses, and they relate to water quality. And then something close to us here that I learned about, there's a community not too far away from us. So you can see us here on this diagram, the Environmental Center, and then the Shady Branch community is over here. They actually had a documentary on Channel 13 about this community, and it's only 20 miles from downtown Dallas, and it's not that far away from us, but this community still has no running water. So you kind of think, well, that's odd. You know, you think of US and Texas, and, you know, we're pretty developed. How come they don't have running water? But it's a small unincorporated part of Dallas, and apparently it's going to cost about $6.5 million to run pipes to this community. So as of yet, they still have not gotten running water to that community, but they have to truck water in to that community. So I thought that was interesting, you know, given today's day and age, that there are still communities in the US that don't have access to water. And my last thing for you is just about water conservation and care. It's a reflection question for y'all. What are some steps you and your family can take to conserve water or take care of water resources? And then two, think about a local body of water around you, and then in what ways have human activities positively or negatively affected it? So for example, I live off of Cedar Creek Lake, and while I may try my best not to pollute, I went out there this morning, and there are 3 tires in the channel. There's also some pipes and some styrofoam coolers. So there is a lot of trash, unfortunately, that ends up in the channel. But then also it made me reflect about my own self. There's soil erosion, and soil erosion is a form of pollution because it increases the sediment that goes into the water. And if I had the money, I would invest in erosion control. But something interesting, from the time I moved in to now, the amount of soil that has pushed its way down the slope where I live, that gate has over a foot of soil in front of it. So we actually had to remove all the soil in front of the gate in order to push it open. So I live on a hill, and whenever it rains, you can just see where that soil has eroded and it's moving all the way down. So that's something where I can work on to help reduce my negative impact on the water as well. So think about what y'all can do as well. So I'm gonna go ahead and stop sharing, and we're gonna pass it back to Mr. Broughton, and he's gonna answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Ramirez. The question that came in was, what can I do to conserve water? And that is your challenge question, so I don't want to tell you too many things about that. I'm sure you already know things like take shorter showers or turn off the water while you brush your teeth. But if you want to look at one resource that will help you learn new ways that you maybe haven't thought of yet on how to conserve water. You can go to takecareoftexas.org. Once you get there, there are all sorts of resources on how to take care of not only water, but also soil and air. It's a great resource for learning how to take care of Texas. That's why it's called takecareoftexas.org. So there you will find some ways that you probably haven't thought of to conserve water. Now, one other way we can conserve water is through using rain barrels. And Mr. Gorman is going to explain how we use rain barrels here at our Environmental Education Center.
Thank you, Mr. Broughton. And we want to welcome you to this cold, wintry day here in North Central Texas. We're going to talk a little bit about our recycling rainwater by using barrels. Here at the Environmental Center, we have two projects going on with rainwater recycling. The first one is a 300-gallon system connected to the main building. We catch the rainwater runoff the main building, and we use it to supply water to our greenhouse. That's actually a 330-gallon system. The other one is a 2,500-gallon container at the barn, and it's used to collect water and supply water for the livestock that's housed at the barn. The recycled rainwater is good for washing your hair. It's also good for washing your clothes. It takes very little detergent. And you can purchase a commercial rainwater recycling program at Home Depot for about $100. That will hold 50 gallons of water, or you can make your own out of recycled barrels. Cost you about $50. And now I'm going to share my screen. This program is about rain barrel collection. And the first one is they use 1 or 2 barrels to collect the water. However, here at the center, we went a little overboard. I collected 6 different 55-gallon barrels to our runoff system from the top of one of the classrooms. The Rainwater Recycling Project was made possible through a grant from the Junior League of Dallas. Some pros and cons of a rain barrel system. Water barrels as storage equipment for rainwater harvesting has its positives and negatives. The advantages and disadvantages of rainwater barrel harvesting include some of the following. The pros of rain barrels. The barrels are the easiest way of collecting rainwater. They are cheap, especially if they are being reused after having a previous life. Since they are being reused, it becomes a great way to reduce the amount of waste going to the landfill. These 55-gallon barrels are very large. If we don't reuse them and just take them out and pull them back in the landfill, they take up a tremendous amount of space. The barrels are lightweight, easy to move around, even by one person. They are easily installed, thus reducing the cost of installation. Some of the cons: they need to be located next to the water supply area, usually your roof. Need to be sealed to prevent mosquito breeding. We don't want the mosquitoes to be breeding in there because there's a very large amount of water contained in there. Usually they have very weak water pressure. You turn your water hydrant on or water faucet on, you're expecting pretty good pressure to come out of it. If you have recycled rain barrels, you don't have very much pressure. And they have to be previously used as food grade containers, or you have to get new barrels. Now, the other one we use is what's called a dry system. It is very large. It's a variation of the rain barrel setup, but it involves a larger storage volume. Our container is 2,500 gallons. Essentially, the collection pipe dries after each rain event since it empties directly into the top of a tank. On the other part is the wet one, is that is buried completely underground, and it's takes a lot more work and a lot more involvement in it. This is a picture of our dry system. This is a 2,500 gallon cistern that collects this rainwater that falls on our barn out there. We use a 40 by 60 foot area, and it will actually save at the end of the year, it will have collected 61,000 gallons of water. Some of the pros, it can store a very large amount of rainwater. I just said 2,500 gallons. It's great for climates where rainfall happens with infrequent large storms. Part of the world, they get a lot of rain for a short period of time, and then it doesn't rain again for a long time, and they don't have community service water. So they store it up in these large systems. Can be inexpensive to implement. It doesn't cost much. Once you get the initial barrel, it doesn't cost much to put it in place. It's less complicated system, so maintenance is easier. All it is a large barrel connected with some PVC pipe. Filter system can be installed so water can be potable or used by humans. The word potable means drinkable. It can supply water to areas that have no community water system. A lot of Central America and South America communities, they don't have water piped to each house. They have a central location water supply, and they can catch the water off some buildings, and you can go and get your own water. The cons, the storage tank must be located next to your house, weak water pressure unless a pump is installed. The grant information, the grant to install this 2,500 gallon dry system recycling system was made possible by the H-E-B grocery chain from San Antonio and David Dewhurst, which was Lieutenant Governor at that time. Now I'm going to stop sharing my screen with you. The collection area on the main building here at the EEC yields about 41,000 gallons of water annually. And the collection on the barn yields about 61,000 gallons. No electricity is used in the rainwater recycling program. And another thing is, if you're going to put in a rainwater recycling program, you need to use a black or dark blue one. The cistern or the container needs to be opaque. You don't want the light going through it because algae will form in there. If you're going to do it, open up, turn the barrel upside down. If you're going to use a recycle one, turn it upside down. There will be a triangle on the bottom, and it needs to have 1, 2, 4, or 6 numbers inside of it. Those are the ones that are food grade and are good for you to use. This time I'm going to stop sharing and let Mr. Broughton answer any of your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Gorman. The question that came up was, can I install a rain barrel where I live? And the answer is probably, but I can't say for sure that it's a yes, because you may live where there's a homeowners association that allows certain things and doesn't allow certain things to be attached to your house where you live. And there are also city ordinances that you have to follow where you live. So before you install a rain barrel system, make sure you check with your homeowners association if you do have one of those. And if you don't, still check with the city where you live to make sure that you follow all the city ordinances, because if you do install a rain barrel system, it's going to cost you some money. I would say at least $100. And you don't want to install something that a homeowners association or the city is going to make you take right back down because you didn't follow the rules where you live. But you probably can do one. Just make sure you do it right so that you can leave it up after you've installed it. All right, now I'm going to share my screen to do a quick recap of what we did today. And so today we discussed managing resources. During this virtual field trip, students discovered or explored methods of land use and management and described its effect on land fertility. Students also identified source, use, quality, management, and conservation of water. So we started off with an introduction of why managing natural resources is so important with Ms. Nash. Next, we looked at methods of land use and management with Mrs. Fuller. Third, we looked at managing and conserving water with Mr. Ramirez. And last, you saw the rain barrels that we have out here at our Environmental Education Center with Mr. Gorman. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. We appreciate you taking the time to learn about managing resources with us. We'd like to know what you think about today's field trip, and you can let us know by going to www.tiny.cc/EEC feedback and filling out a short feedback form for us. We use your comments and suggestions to improve what we do here with these virtual field trips. We hope to see you again for the next virtual field trip that we have for environmental systems. Have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you next time. Goodbye.